ASEAN first and foremost is not a union. It's not a marriage.
It's true.
Yeah, it's not a political economic union. It is an intergovernmental organization. Yeah?
It's literally in the name. It's an association.
Association of Southeast Asian nations. And we should never compare this to a EU. Fair. We can talk about EU later on, maybe different episode, how the history is super interesting, right? Between France and Germany.
Yeah.
Now, there's no single parliament, there's no single currency. There are talks about introducing these things for the longest time. But so far, there's no appetite or push by the members, by the countries to do so.
With the might of ASEAN, why don't we have our own standing army? In his own words. And I said, and deep inside my heart, I feel like, no, that's not the purpose of ASEAN. That's not, it is not what it meant to be.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome to our second installation of Sidang by KSI. Hi, my name is Luqman, and this is Zaim.
Zaim. You do it again. Okay, all good.
Okay. I think the whole episode feels surreal, at least to me lah. Yeah, because we managed to talk about something that is that is very integral to our day-to-day life. But not only that, we also provide criticism. But on the technical aspect, sure, we have some hiccups here and there. It's expected. It can be smooth sailing from the get-go. We also expected a lot of outcomes and criticisms, and that is very much welcome. And I think the foremost criticism that I get, at least personally, is because of there's some choppy aspect of it.
Sure.
It's okay. We try to make it as conversational as it should. How about you? What do you think about this?
The first episode is experimental. In fact, all of this is experimental. And we're only going to get better over time. And so I only expect the person to be the worst version of what we're going to do. And it's only going to improve over time. And hopefully we can provide value, because that's the ultimate aim of the podcast, is to add value to you guys. And hopefully you can learn a thing or two, as well as for us, we're also learning a few things as we do this.
True. Yeah, at least we need to start somewhere. Right, it might be like a rough sailing or something, just like what happened during the past 2 weeks, isn't it? Where ASEAN Summit has been convening in Malaysia, and there's a lot of hubbubs about it. But at least we start somewhere. It may be rough, it may not be perfect, but it paved a way to somewhere lah. So I will leave it to Zaim. I think what actually happened during the past
Before we get to ASEAN Summit 2025, we're going to learn and unpack ASEAN. ASEAN is often heard but rarely understood. And the question I want to, or rather we want to unpack today is, what is ASEAN and do we really need it? Do we really need ASEAN? So there are 3 parts to our episode. The first is, what is ASEAN and how does it work? Second is, what happened, as what Luqman mentioned, what happened in that summit that happened in Kuala Lumpur? Most people think of the jam, but what actually happened during the summit itself. And third, so what? What does it actually matter? So, sometimes you, especially this year in Malaysia, if you heard about ASEAN, you just nod your head. Okay, I think I know what's ASEAN. Maybe you know ASEAN, but we're going to unpack what is ASEAN, and hopefully you learn a thing or two from this. So, before I start the introduction to ASEAN, tell me what comes to mind when you think of
ASEAN. It's a group of people that like to eat rice. That's it. I don't.
Yeah,
it's just ASEAN is an interesting concept.
Interesting concept.
Yeah, it does not only invite conversation, does not only invite dialogue, it invite jazz.
No, and you are right, because people that go to summits in capital cities, right? And sometimes we don't know what's happening during the summit, right? And I'm wearing this krama. This is Cambodia krama. This is the Cambodian krama. Usually is in red or blue. But I chose to pick a different color, yellowish.
I think it's a bit of green.
Green, yellowish, a bit colorblind. So this is a Cambodian krama because we just came back from Cambodia. And our company KSI, we are very ASEAN focused, so we go to capital cities of ASEAN countries every single year. And we've been to Vientiane, Jakarta, Phnom Penh,
Not bad.
and hopefully we can go to Dili, Timor-Leste.
Yeah, yeah.
One of these.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's get to ASEAN. Let me give you the basics, the dummies guide. Number one, ASEAN was founded in Bangkok,
Bangkok.
8 August 1967. Now, the five founding members,
Members. Yeah.
but they were all men that signed the agreement, the
Mhm.
Bangkok Declaration in 1967. Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. I think you like to refer to this as Nusantara.
Nusantara.
Nusantara ASEAN. And eventually the CLM joined
Mhm.
afterwards. Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, um, and and other countries. As you know, we have Brunei,
Mhm.
and more recently we have Timor-Leste
Timor-Leste.
that joined this year, 2025. The purpose of ASEAN is similar to the purpose of United Nations, UN, is to prevent conflict
Mhm.
and is to promote peace. And you have to understand, 1967 was a time during Cold War.
Cold War. It's
And
a
so-
quite height.
Bit of it. Remember,
Yeah.
there was also a war that was happening
Mm.
in the Vietnam War.
Vietnam War.
And so ASEAN didn't want to be involved in any of the superpowers conflict. At the time was US and Soviet Union. And so that was the purpose of having ASEAN, is to promote peace. And eventually now we have dialogue, we have collaboration, and we have this idea of ASEAN centrality
Mhm.
to make our own decision, our own destiny. And there is a very common thing when it comes to ASEAN. It's called the ASEAN Way. ASEAN Way. You may have seen this when people lock hands together. It's consensus, it's not interference. And the idea is, how do we keep the peace in the region? How do we keep the peace in the region? And the structure of ASEAN, I won't go through the whole structure. It is actually quite extensive. But broadly speaking, you have the ASEAN Summit, which is what we're going to talk about later on. The highest decision-making body for ASEAN. It's like an AGM for a company, right? Even NGO, you have AGMs, and you decide during AGMs who's going to become the president, the secretary, the resolution. So think of it as the same way. You have the rotating chairman. So every year, ASEAN has a chairman. It's actually led by the leader of the ASEAN country. It rotates. So last year was Laos.
Laos.
This year is Malaysia, 2025. Next year is
Philippines.
Philippines. And you will rotate. And it's actually not a fixed. It's not a fixed rotation, because Myanmar we actually skip Myanmar in one of the championship because of obviously the conflict happening in Myanmar. Okay, all this work in ASEAN is done by the ASEAN Secretariat based in Jakarta, and is led by a Secretary General.
Mhm.
And the Secretary General now, it also changes based. They have a term, and it changes based on the country. So the current Secretary General is a Cambodian, and previously was a Brunei, if I'm not mistaken. So it does change. And fun fact, for other positions, so for the top position, obviously it has been lobbied by member states, ASEAN member states, but other positions you apply.
Apply.
CV, you submit your CV and you apply, for example, Deputy Secretary General. Deputy Secretary General for one of the three pillars. We'll talk about this later on. So it has a very corporate meritocratic approach when it comes to hiring staff in ASEAN Secretariat. But again, the ASEAN member states fund ASEAN Secretariat, and so they have a say in how ASEAN Secretariat is run. And this is what most people talk about, the talking shop of ASEAN. We have hundreds, thousands of meetings. And you might heard of ministerial meetings or youth leaders, defense, economic, trade. You also have working level meetings. So they are in the thousands every single year. ASEAN has three pillars. You have political security, you have economic, and you have social, cultural pillars. So you've got three pillars, and they are actually what they mean. So political security is about diplomacy, defense, regional peace agreements. Economic is of trade, inter-trade, free trade agreements. You got multiple major trade agreements like RCEP, investments, and then the social cultural is education, health, environment, youth, people-to-people engagements. Now, people might think, this ASEAN, sounds like a tourism campaign. It sounds like one of those random tourism campaigns by Asia or by Malaysia Airlines. But to be fair to ASEAN, they actually, ever since it was founded, there have been no interstate war, and even if there have been conflicts, skirmishes, they have always been resolved peacefully. So obviously, in the more recent Thailand, Cambodia skirmish, it was resolved with the help of Malaysia, China, and the United States. We also are moving towards a more freer, I suppose, travel between states. So if you go to different member states now in ASEAN, different countries in ASEAN, you may not need a visa. And you can even use their gates, which is super cool, by the way.
Yeah, very cool.
But in Indonesia, even when we went to Cambodia, we also are looking at lowering tariffs. So the prices between stuff that we buy in the region is cheaper. So we have the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, FTA, and we have other things. So we have education, cultural response. ASEAN member states, ASEAN countries gave humanitarian aid to Myanmar. Recently, they had natural disaster.
Mhm.
And obviously now at the time we're recording also Philippines is also going through some difficult hurricanes or typhoons. So we're going to support them as well. Now people like to compare ASEAN with EU. And I think it's not fair.
Mhm.
ASEAN first and foremost is not a union. It's not a marriage. Yeah, it's not a political economic union. It is an intergovernmental organization.
It's literally in the name. It's a association.
Association of Southeast Asian nations.
Mhm.
And we should never compare this to a EU. Fair. It's not the design. We can talk about EU later on, maybe different episode, how the history is super interesting, right? Between France and Germany.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, there's no single parliament, there's no single currency. There are talks about introducing these things for the longest time, but so far there's no appetite or push by the members, by the countries to do so. And ASEAN, ASEAN is like ASEAN people, right? Very friendly, communal, like you say, eat rice. So we're very flexible as a group, not rigid European Union. So I think that's why if we were to put EU system or EU structure here, it not actually work. But we can always talk about how we can make that work. Now, Luqman, just based on what we've been talking so far, what would you think are sort of the criticisms or weaknesses of ASEAN on top of your mind when you think about this?
Before I can go to criticism, one comment I can say about ASEAN is, in a positive light, it is weirdly ideally pragmatic, right? It is ideally pragmatic because if it is like purely idealist organization, they would surely push for a more like democratic representation, just like what EU has been done. But instead, they opted for a consensus for a lot of their actions and initiatives. And in a way, they are idealists in terms of, they wanted to, the idea is for the whole block of ASEAN to move together, in the same direction. But what's pragmatic about it, they recognize that although the idea is still there, the mechanism, they need to be realistic. If they are too rigid, it will shut down a lot of chances for a healthy dialogue and conversation. They will lose one dialogue platform. Now we can move to the criticism. One of many criticism that a lot of detractors and political commentators said about ASEAN is ASEAN moves too slowly. How slow? I don't know. I don't know what rate does it compare to, but it always say ASEAN moves too slowly. And why does it move too slowly? Because the ASEAN, by design, actually avoid tough decisions. For example, like been stated in the brief, which is one of them is Myanmar crisis. One thing that I want to say about this criticism, move too slowly, avoid tough decision, I think is actually by design. And second thing is, it actually serves a lot of purpose for what ASEAN is designed to do. I mean, it's actually done a lot of good things rather than bad things. Obviously, if we compare like humanitarian issues, so on and so forth, there's always a room for improvement. But for what he has already done to this region is very good. Let me tell you the story about Southeast Asia in the first place. Southeast Asia is actually not a political term first. It's not something that the people here came out on our own. It is actually a military term during World War. Yeah, because they have like the Pacific Command Center, the Western Theater, so on and so forth. And this is the Southeast Asia command center. We actually have a commander here to fight against the Japanese. I think the Allied forces. Allied forces, yeah. And from that moment on, because of this, there's a single military governance in that area during World War II. The term Southeast Asia sort of solidified, right? And solidified into some block because of some shared experiences during World War II. Mind you, before World War II, even before culturally, there's actually a very distinct group among the nations in South Asia. We have the Mekong group, right? The Mekong River group, and also the Telosocratic group, which is a maritime countries like Malaya, Java Island, Sumatra, Borneo, and only then do we make a common aspiration to form one single identity. So, what's the difference between ASEAN and EU then? We must remember, before we draw comparison between ASEAN and EU, both actually arise from a very different origin, starting point, and they wanted to achieve two different things. For EU, it arises from commerce, from steel and coal coalition. I don't know the
Community,
the community. Yeah. It started from commerce, started from an economic consideration, and from economic consideration, they built political out. But for ASEAN, it's different. It's completely the polar opposite. Because ASEAN first start as a political organization And then they try to build the economic consideration later. Before before the formation of Asia, this region, people said, oh, this is the Balkans of Asia. Why? Because we have so many ethnic groups, we have so many religion, even our geography is not that forgiving, right? And this is people, the Western pundits and Western political commentators have always predicted that this region we're going to fall like Balkans.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But why we didn't? Why we didn't turn like the Balkans? Exactly because of ASEAN's flexibility and moves too slowly.
ASEAN way.
ASEAN way. We're talking about ASEAN way. Like we cannot force people. This is a country. This is a region that has lived under the shadow of imperialism for how many years? Colonialism. And this region has been shaped by the politics of our colonial overlords.
Yeah.
It's different than the EU. The EU can talk all high and mighty about the human rights, but they are the one who caused the human rights issues. And even prior to this podcast even recording, I did some quick googling. I searched on Google, or name me a few instances where EU has successfully done a successful humanitarian intervention. All of the recorded successful humanitarian intervention is actually done in Africa, right? Why? Because they're the one who caused it.
Just this is such an interesting point. The reason why ASEAN countries are reluctant or don't want to give part of their sovereignty to a supranational organization like the EU is because exactly what you mentioned. Many of the countries in the region are actually new when it comes to being independent. So for them, sovereignty is everything. We died for this. We're not going to give even 5-10% of our sovereignty to another body to decide something for us. So that's why I think from a philosophical stance, and I think we don't talk about this enough, is that's why there's a reluctance to even consider giving part of our sovereignty to another body.
Yeah.
So it's not even on table. Yeah. The discussion on forming a EU-like structure is not even on the table because of what you mentioned.
Yeah.
The history of what we've been through as a people, right? As peoples has shaped how we are today.
And don't even dare to say that we never even considered it in the first place. We, so as the Asian collective, have considered to make a supranational government, which is the Greater Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, isn't it? And see how it turns out.
Yeah. But to be fair, that was an imperialist Japan.
Yeah, but a lot of people who are leftist people, they're welcoming this supranational. But one thing that they fail to consider is the reality is people here have yet to feel the full fruits of democracy. Yeah,
And prosperity as well.
it's true.
And so, why give up our power or decision-making process when we ourselves are not fully developed or have full sovereignty, right?
It's true.
Now, it's such an interesting, fascinating first segment. We'll come back to this maybe a segment.
Yeah.
Next segment.
Next segment.
Now, talking about world leaders and, the historical perspective of ASEAN. More 2-3 weeks ago when the world leaders descended on ASEAN, and this is why we're going to talk about the ASEAN summit, not because it's topical, but because I think it is a significant moment for the bloc. Well, so many people have said, especially in Asia, that this is the most successful ASEAN summit ever. The 47th summit, which was held in Kuala Lumpur from 26 to 28 October. Now, obviously, I don't know whether this is the most. I haven't lived long enough to know whether this is the most. I suspect maybe the first one was probably the most successful one.
Yeah.
I suppose this could be the most successful in recent history because of the people who attended. You had President Trump. You had the China Premier, or I think we understand as Prime Minister. You had the Australian Prime Minister. You had the Japan Prime Minister. You had the South Korea Prime Minister. You had the Brazil President. You had the South Africa President. You had the Canada Prime Minister. So a lot of people came for this summit, which I think was a big deal because usually you don't really have this number of world leaders coming into a summit. Obviously, the President of Russia wasn't there. The President of China wasn't there as well. So these are obviously what people say, the counterbalance to the US, their leaders were not there. And also, this is the first time that Timor-Leste was accepted as a member state, as a country of ASEAN. So that brings from 10 to 11. 11 member states now. Malaysia was praised because Malaysia was the chair. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim was the gracious host for this. And, they praised him for being able to bring this number of people to the summit. Now, the three outcomes for the summit. First, as we mentioned earlier, Timor-Leste finally became a full member state of ASEAN. Now, they have been I think they applied 12, 13 years ago. And finally they got membership. And I think a lot of people credit Anwar Ibrahim for that because Anwar pushed really for Timor-Leste to get it. There are some resistance, and we've always said that here it's a bit more sensitive, but there have been some resistance from some countries, not one or two, but some countries are a bit reluctant. Second is the ASEAN China FTA 3.0. Okay,
3.0.
Oh, upgrade. In fact, it's
Wow.
literally called the ASEAN China FTA 3.0. Upgrade,
Upgrade.
like expansion pack.
Yeah, like a premium plus.
Premium plus. So this means that China and ASEAN are collaborating further. And don't forget, yeah, China and ASEAN are already each other's. Well, China is ASEAN's number one trading partner, trading bloc.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty sure ASEAN is top 3 for China as well. And digital economy, green economy, SME supply chain, all this good stuff was part of the ASEAN China FTA 3.0 upgrade. And this is my personal thing. Number 3 is the fact that Malaysia, as the ASEAN chair, was able to push for the ASEAN AI safety network. And Luqman knows me, I have an AI bias. I love AI. So I put this as number 3 because even though we already have an ASEAN AI working group, but Malaysia was able to push for an ASEAN AI safety network, which is going to be launched in Malaysia next year.
Next year.
Q1 26. They're going to hire people to be part of the secretariat, to be based in Putrajaya under the Ministry of Digital. I know a lot because I attended an AI safe launch. And this is basic stuff. Idea is to be able to create a platform for ethical and safe AI use. I think ASEAN needs to take that step forward when it comes to AI. We cannot be on the back foot. So I'm so happy that we finally got this. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for once, ASEAN headlines were about results, not blueprints. So I say kudos to ASEAN for making this progress. Obviously, we can talk a lot more about the results and achievements, but I want to go to the next segment, which is so what, Ahmad? You've heard me talk about the introduction to ASEAN and maybe some of this ASEAN summit stuff. So what for you? Like, what do you think as a young person, as a corporate executive, think tank policy, corporate policy practitioner? What can we make of ASEAN? For you and for people on the streets. How can we take advantage of what we have here?
I think I don't want to say too early, but I think it's to give a concrete answer to what the common people, the people who are just like you and me. It's still too early to know what kind of impact that might be befall upon them. But the thing that we can safely say is that at least we have some net positive direction, which is towards, for example, the ASEAN China FTA 3.0 upgrade. It means that a lot more integration of commerce, of sustainable products. Because, for example, I think 2 weeks ago, Proton just launched the Proton Mas 5, the cheapest EV in Malaysia. Just 3 years ago, even talks about EVs is pretty much unheard of in the streets. You don't hear people in the streets, even teachers talking about EVs. But yesterday, my mom said that she is considering to buy the Proton Mas 5. Yeah, and the only thing that actually discouraged her from going to that direction is macam mana nak charge? How do you charge a car? And my mom said that, she's been getting a lot of promotional emails from Maxis. She said we can install solar panels and whatever. Yeah, it's actually part of the deal. And this is where I said, no, the one of example, the ASEAN China FTA 3.0. What it means is that in China, as of right now, there's an oversupply of solar panels. Now, this is a very great idea to tap into. What it means is people, the normal people, without conscience, they can buy, they can procure, they immediately benefit from this.
Yeah.
They can buy the solar panels, they can buy all the charging ports and battery to supply. And if enough people are buying these solar panels in bulk, actually they're going to relieve a lot of electrical load burden to TNB, if you think about it. Yeah, because a lot of more people going to, instead of consuming energy, housing roofs are going to supply electricity back to the grid. That's how it's supposed to be. And this is just one of many achievements and successes in the recent ASEAN meeting.
Yeah, so the supply chain is getting more integrated.
More integrated.
From China to move down to Malaysia. And don't forget, we've been all across ASEAN, and we've seen these Chinese EVs everywhere now.
EV everywhere.
And the company is owned by
Yes, yes.
major Chinese. So supply chain is getting stronger. So just for debate, would this happen anyway without ASEAN? Would China be able to integrate the supply chains between us and them and us and Southeast Asia even with the ASEAN? Do you think?
I think, if we put Malaysia as a sole benefactor in this conversation, sure, we can achieve even without ASEAN.
Sure.
But we must remember that the same free trade agreement also applied to Timor Leste. For in the scale of like a young flourishing country that wanted to achieve advancement in that country, if you put yourself in the shoes of Timor Leste, it's like a huge jump of advancement. Like we have to go through petrol, we have to go through coal, but they can jump straight to solar panels. They leapfrog, and they don't have to deal with a lot of complexities on how to upgrade the national line or supply grid, or they just, okay, this is a technology that we're going to use. This is a thing that they can start with. And that's the thing about ASEAN. It benefits not those who are already in power, already like have a strong position, but it works to support those who cannot. Those who did not have the power.
I'll just add this for business community. One thing that I really appreciate about ASEAN is the fact that there are many sideline ASEAN events during the summits. And I work with many of these organizations, from the ASEAN Young Entrepreneurs, and I've had the chance to also see this ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, ABIS, which is organized by ASEAN Business Advisory Council, ASEAN back, and there are 10. I suppose now with Timor Leste, they're going to be the 11th ASEAN back, ASEAN BAC. And the fact is, even if you're not expanding regionally in ASEAN, you're able to build your network through associations like this. And that by itself is a net plus. The fact that if I need to go to Singapore to do business, I know who to talk to. And I think that's something that is positive for the region, even if I'm not doing business there. And it also allows you to understand the different challenges that other countries face. We all know this, you mentioned earlier, Nusantara or Maritime ASEAN is different than the one in CLMV, right? Very different. But the fact that we are in the same block, we are able to understand the challenges and how can we contribute. And we also learn from Laos, the battery of Southeast Asia. It's true. We learn, and obviously, the ASEAN power grid, right? The idea of how do we connect this disparate energy sources from a region, right, into one, idealistically one power grid, right? And if you look at Sarawak with the hydro dams, if you look at Laos, there's so many similarities, and what can we do to collaborate? And in Malaysia, Sarawak in Malaysia, potentially supplying clean energy via the hydro dams to Singapore. So there's so much potential in terms of collaboration between the different countries, and not just that. Taking away the economic side, the youth angle, education, cultural dimensions, right? I was actually very fortunate to be part of this thing called ASEAN Youth Fellowship, AYF, initiated by Singapore when they were the chair of ASEAN 2018. It's still ongoing. Still ongoing, yeah. And it's so amazing how, because of this program, I'm able to meet people from young leaders from across the region and to understand more deeply their issues, right? The youth, the community issues that they face. But sometimes I ponder whether can this still be done with the ASEAN? Would we naturally gravitate towards collaboration with an association, or would we eventually form our own version of ASEAN if there was no ASEAN today? I don't know. And I think this is something that I ponder a lot, because for what we discussed earlier, supranational body that people, obviously Brussels dictate a lot of their policy, right? But the benefit is there. It's clear. If there was no EU, they probably form an EU. For ASEAN, it's still, I don't know, it's still a question mark whether the things that we do today can still be done with the ASEAN as an association. Because sometimes this sounds like a nice to have, but is it really a must have? That's the question I always ponder when I think about ASEAN, beyond sort of what we've been discussing. I don't know whether you have the same thoughts, but this is one of the things on the back of my mind, because the reality is this, right? We have been privileged to go to ASEAN, but the reason why we do this episode in the first place is because most people don't know what's ASEAN. The people on the street probably doesn't know enough about ASEAN to make an informed view of ASEAN. Yeah. And so because of that, this is a massive issue. Like, is this not even relevant for the people on the street? Yeah. And sometimes I think maybe.
Even like, maybe? For example, I talked to a friend of mine who was a lorry driver, right? We talk about a lot of things, but one of the things the one comment that he said is, very much, how to say it, leave a mark on me. Is he asked, with the might of ASEAN, why don't we have our own standing army? In his own words, lah.
Sure, sure.
And I said,
Yeah.
and deep inside my heart, I feel like, no, that's not the purpose of ASEAN. That's not, it's not what it meant to be.
Yeah.
Why would you need a standing army? But for these common people who know very little about ASEAN, it's like, it goes without saying, like, we should, with a combined, very simple mathematics, right? Yeah, but that's the thing when we want to talk about ASEAN.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they generally know the existence, but the nitty gritty details of what ASEAN is very much less communicated.
Yeah.
Less
Yeah.
communicated.
This is why the question, so what, is not easily answered because people are privileged to be in a position to know this.
Yes.
People on the street, they don't interface ASEAN every day. They probably read the news. They see the billboards in KL now, right? ASEAN, the nice logo, which is designed. I mean, the ASEAN logo is designed by a nation. It's something that I think was raised by a lot of leaders in the region, is that ASEAN must be beneficial and relatable to the man on the street. When a woman the street, man on the street, and also the shopping mall also, right? So this is a challenge. As much as ASEAN is what we make of it, for the young leaders, for the business community, for civil servants, policymakers, we have to do a lot more to make sure that ASEAN is something that people can see, feel, and touch. Because doing summits alone is not enough. Conference alone is not enough. The 2024 ASEAN Community Vision is not enough. High-level documents do not reach the people en masse. And so this is one of the biggest challenge, I think, for the ASEAN, is that how do we make this more relatable? Obviously, there's so many things that we can do. I remember when I was younger, we talked about forming this ASEAN Youth Parliament so that young people can discuss and debate and form resolutions to strengthen the union, stuff like that. But obviously, it moves slowly at the pace of the leaders, and every single year the priorities change. We all know to have effective leadership and results, you need to have one policy that's there for a long time, led by hopefully someone that can do it for maybe 4 or 5 years, right? But now it's every year it changes. So every year the priorities also change. And so this is a common challenge. I think this is a big challenge for ASEAN. And the story, and I think the idea of ASEAN needs to be able to be, as mentioned, it needs to be felt by everyone. So I think this is a common problem. I think it's not going to be solved easily also. But this is why I think it's necessary. It's not perfect, but we need it. But we need to be more relevant, especially in 2025, because the population of ASEAN is 700 million. So majority of them are young, below 35. And so this is a big challenge. How do we make it more relatable to Gen Z? How do we make it more relatable to Gen Y? One of the reflections I've had is, a lot of the ASEAN engagements actually happen without us realizing, through gaming. Yeah, esports, right? People actually, they see each other, wow, this guy is from Cambodia, this guy is from Indonesia, and this has nothing to do with ASEAN.
Yeah. And then they banter. Yeah.
Not knowing what's ASEAN.
Yeah.
The engagement is absolutely important, and we have to do it at scale. Fellowship programs, there's only about 30, 40, 50 people. It has to be scale. Millions of people should be able to suppose visit countries or work in other people's countries.
Yeah.
So there's some of my reflections over here. I mean, we're here to support ASEAN establishment. We also say that things must change, things must improve, because don't forget, 1967 was when it was founded. It's 2025. Isn't it time to modernize?
Let me try to be the angel's advocate.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. I don't want to put the devil's advocate because it's too satanic for our podcast. Yeah, angel's advocate. So I would argue that once again, we take EU as an example. The difference between EU and ASEAN is actually not that big. What's the main determinant factor of difference between ASEAN and EU is EU have a much better PR, much better marketing campaign.
Sure.
And the smart part in this is not to suggest that ASEAN need to have or build a much better or much more advanced PR or marketing campaign for ASEAN. But we have to look at the historical context of why EU have a much better marketing and PR campaign. If you look at at the history, the reason for EU to be formed is because of Euro at the periphery, at the frontier between the ugly communists, ugly Soviets. And they wanted to showcase that with commonalities, with free market, with commerce, they can build a better organization. They can build a much better governance framework for all. Because in the Soviet Union, the main flavor of international cooperation is internationalism. Yeah, they will provide, and they wanted to counter that. And this is where it is becoming much more interesting. Because why now? Why now? Almost every single important leaders attended this ASEAN. We have Donald Trump, Li Qiang, Anthony Albanese, Sana Takeichi, Lee Jae-myung, and so on and so forth. Even Silva and Cyril Ramaphosa in attendance. Why now? Because we are at the height of the beginning of Second Cold War, and I'm not even talking like a rambling schizophrenic.
No.
I'm not trying to be a ableist also, because we must also remember that this week also, I think it's these past 3 days, United States has allowed for nuclear testing to run again.
After many years of embedding it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and now there's news that China is considering to build a few more nuclear powered ships, rivaling the 11 one United States already have. And this is actually the high time for the reawakening of a second Cold War that's happening. And obviously, right now, if we look at EU right now, EU has sort of faded from. If you look at the voter participation in the European Parliament, it's actually gone, it declined. It only arise like I think only in recent times. I think that's because of the Russian Ukraine factor. Yeah, but on a scale, the voter participation is going down,
Yeah.
which means that there's a less interest among young people regarding the longevity of EU. But the conversation, even the fact that the podcast that we are discussing about ASEAN is a major sign that ASEAN is gaining traction in the consciousness of the people, right? And now because of that, this is the spotlight of the world. Have no choice but to put the camera here, to shine a light on this region, because this region is the, how to say this, the beta testing point for all this major power to test and flex its might. And this is why also I think that it is a God bless that the ASEAN way is our way. Because how do we even juggle all those competing ideological rivalries, not only among the big superpowers, but also internally? How do we avoid that? What do you think? I don't know. Just
Makes
to
sense.
yeah.
The discourse on Second World War has been around for many years actually. I remember when I was in LSE, some academics disagree on the framing, but I get your point. We live in the multipolar world. With America used to be the superpower, the only superpower, aka unipolar, after World War II, after Cold War. And now you see the rising challenges like China, Russia, and other countries, rural countries, according to the West. I agree. ASEAN is the good counterbalance to having to pick a side. I think, there's always a discussion on don't make us pick a side. They will always tell Malaysians, Singaporeans, Indonesians, Filipinos, which side are you on? America or China? And then they always say, no, we are on our side. On your side, we're on our side. Malaysia doesn't choose US or China. Malaysia chooses Malaysia. Having said that, the recent controversy, I think we should talk about it when Malaysia signed the agreement on reciprocal trade, ART. And a lot of it was controversial because it seemed as though Malaysia was compromising too much on its own sovereignty. For example, Malaysia must consult United States before signing a digital free trade agreement. Obviously, digital, like not free trade agreement, but digital free trade agreement. Even those things showed that as much as we talk about ASEAN centrality, that ASEAN is at the center of Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, it still shows that we are struggling to balance between the major powers. Major powers. As much as we say, we're not picking a side, it still shows straight. We balance here, we balance here, we balance here, balance here. That's a problem because we talk ASEAN is the counterbalance, right? We don't speak in one voice, we speak in the voices of 11 countries. Even the logo of ASEAN is hard to break because together, it's hard to break the 11 countries together, right? It's the Cambodian proverb, I mean, one is weak, but 11 combined, getting bunches combined is hard to break. Even, I think the problem with that analogy is the hands holding it is extremely strong.
It's true, bro. It's not even a hand.
China, some
Even if it will not break, it's gonna shred.
our countries are dealing with this very intense as China geopolitical strategic competition.
Yeah.
That even with ASEAN is, I suppose, the shelter, we're still facing such significant pressure. And I think this is why I think the bloc, the association of ASEAN needs to be able to withstand this. And that's why I'm optimistic of ASEAN's future for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm also at the same time
A bit bearish. Yeah.
a bit pessimistic. So how can we stay relevant when we are facing so much pressure from either side?
Yeah.
And, having not, we can't pick a side obviously, but if there's anything about the past few years, with Donald Trump, such a interesting president with such,
he's a character for
very
sure.
I don't know why I'm so careful with my words, but so
It's Trump though, like
great guy.
great guy.
So we're living in different times.
Yeah.
I think one of the points I wanted to push forward was, and this is a more general point, I think that we probably need a renewal in ASEAN, and they can only be driven
Renewal,
right? Modernization, renewal, and it can only be driven by the younger generation. No, I'm not talking about age per se. I'm talking about people who just get it, right? People
But what do you mean by like this?
modernize ASEAN. It has to have a structure that is more responsive
Responsive
to the people. Right now, when you were to communicate with ASEAN secretary, you need to have a way in. We call it in Melayu cable, right? To have connections inside, right? It's not that easy. Okay lah, fine. They are open, but they're not open enough. And also they're under resourced. They don't have enough funding. If you look at recently the rise of Zoran Mamdani in the US, right? The very unlikely candidate in the US mayoral race that actually won to become the New York City mayor. That type of things doesn't really happen in our region, man. It doesn't really happen in our region. And I'm not saying we need a Zoran in this region. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But there must be space for people who are audacious, ambitious to come up through the system to renew it. Fine. We don't have to talk about the countries inside ASEAN. But at the very least, the ASEAN Secretariat should be led by dynamic, by ambitious, by people who can execute and deliver, who can push the boundaries.
Who wants to
do it?
Yeah.
That for me should be at the Secretariat level, because that's the easiest way to change. Leaders of ASEAN can push this if they want. Because we talk about young people all the time, young people are the future of ASEAN. Okay, show us.
Yeah, give us a table. Give us a seat at the table.
So we need to have a more dynamic leadership that can push this region forward and maybe speak truth to power.
For an association who don't want to be the Soviets, it's weird that we have this such an obsession over bureaucracy. It's old. Right?
67.
It's true. Like, oh my God, we outlived the Soviets. But anyhow, I'm reminded by what I forgot his name of this prof. I'm gonna patch it in the post production. Never mind. Yeah,
person is not important enough.
He's not important. He spoke in the IDFR's event as the Institute of Diplomacy and Foreign Relations under the Ministry of MOFA. This is what he said. He said that, ASEAN, for whatever it is, right? ASEAN may have a lot of faults and some backsliding and so on and so forth. But this is the first time in the history of Southeast Asia that collectively the Southeast Asians are trying to build something of a platform, right? Before the existence of the platform, we've been like, breakfast for major world powers. We got the Ming, the Qing, even the Mongols, the French, and whatever it is. And this is the first time that we experimented with an association to discuss and deliberate and at least to stand on our own. But this is where I think what he said, give merit to what Zaim said, that we need to find ways to actually now to make it matter, right? Because we are living in a world where everything is like super fast to some future. We are moving somewhere, but we don't know where. We don't even know what will happen like next week. Like, during the Cold War, they know they can at least figure out what will happen next week. It's nuclear war. But now we don't know. VUCA, volatile, uncontrollable, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Everything. The first step, he said, to move towards this is just to recognize where is our weaknesses. And because if we don't recognize and admit where is our weakness, where can we start to do the homework? Right? It's like you're doing revision, but for what? You don't know, like, I already smart at doing math. But guys, I need to do some more math. No, that's not how it works. You do homework based on somewhere you lack. Only then you can go forward. I don't know. That is what I say.
Don't forget, we're now the ASEAN community vision. We launched all these blueprints, but where's the report card to show that we have achieved or not achieved?
It's true.
That's not there. It's on. That we are able to do this and people don't hold this accountable. You cannot just launch blueprints and then when you don't
And then
achieve it,
hope
you
for the
do
best.
something else. I suppose, certain people,
Mm.
it looks good on paper. And to your point, actually, we never talk about the weaknesses. I would like to see the leaders of ASEAN actually talk about, we have achieved this much, but don't forget we also have these weaknesses. We don't hear this at all.
Mm.
We have to see the world as it is
Mm.
and change it to as how it should be.
Mm.
That's something that I think and I hope to see from the leaders to say, hey, look, there are actually problems here. Let me tell you what the problems are.
Mm.
And this is what we're doing to rectify these problems. We don't hear that.
Mm.
And during the summits, all good. All good.
Professional.
Nothing.
Yeah. And
But also, it
that's thing
seems like the same way.
yeah.
Okay, about it.
Yeah.
So that's what I say. Renewal,
Mm.
decision is necessary. I just some my closing reflections on this. The so what question is ASEAN is important.
Mm.
In many ways, we talk about the benefits. Also, we also talk about the challenges extensively just now.
Mm.
The next few decades matters for ASEAN. It matters. If we don't continuously challenge and improve the ASEAN association, it will falter. It will become irrelevant. And so that's why our role as citizens, policymakers, sorry, as public policy practitioners, your role as citizens, business leaders, civil servants, what have you, is important that we hold it to accountable. We hold it accountable and prove it as we go along. And we build on the strength of ASEAN to make sure that it's responsive and responsible to the people. That's how I would see ASEAN. Luqman, your closing reflections before.
My closing reflection is there are ways that ASEAN can still deliver outcomes. Maybe this multiple definition to what an outcome is, but we still cannot dismiss that ASEAN actually is a net positive to, if not to the world, but to this region. But we need to also be realistically pragmatic as compared to idealistically pragmatic. We need to do a lot more things to ensure that at least the main formative idea of ASEAN can still be achieved, which is a peace and stability for this region.
Okay.
I think we can wrap this up.
Before we close this, enjoy some of the options. There's also some ramblings. I mean, there's the point of the podcast by unqualified experts. As always, wherever you're watching this, don't forget to drop us a comment, like it, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your cats, tell everyone in between, and we'll see you at the next one.
All right. Ciao.